Welcome to Canadian Passages, a project that brings history to life with audio versions of archival material. These audiograms use digital voices to make historical writings accessible anytime, anywhere. The materials in this series come from the archives of the Canadian Forces Base Esquimalt, Naval and Military Museum. Please be warned that this content may contain language considered inappropriate by today's standards. The material is a product of its time and represents the context of the era, as well as the attitudes and opinions of those who created it. In the interests of historical integrity, editing has been done for clarity or brevity only, rather than for censorship. Roland Richard Bourke was born November 28, 1885 in London, England. Roland's father, Dr. Isidore McWilliam Bourke, a Victorian gentleman adventurer, left for the Klondike Gold Rush in 1897, and the family followed. Roland arrived in Canada with his mother and sisters in 1902. In Dawson City, Yukon, the family managed a hotel, hospital, and mining claims. As the gold rush waned, Isidore moved his family to Nelson, British Columbia, where they took up fruit farming. In 1907, Roland's eyesight was permanently damaged and his cousin was fatally injured while using explosives to clear tree stumps on the farm. After war was declared, Roland tried to enlist in the Canadian Army, Navy, and Air Service, but in 1915 he was rejected because of his impaired vision. Undeterred, he traveled to England in 1916 and talked his way into the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve, where he was assigned to motor launches, often crewed by Canadians. He spent a year assigned to Larne, Ireland, but then transferred to the frontline base at Dover. Despite his defective vision, Roland's heroism at Blockship Raids in 1918 earned him Victoria Cross and Distinguished Service Order medals. Some of Roland Bourke's papers and photographs are in the collections of the CFB Esquimalt Museum. Amongst these are stories and letters relating his First World War experiences. A transcript of a letter written by Roland Bourke to his half-brother John in October 1918 is in the CFB Esquimalt archives. The letter describes the Blockship Raids that garnered Distinguished Service Order and Victoria Cross medals for Roland while he served on motor launches in the RNVR. The blockship operations were a necessity to safeguard supply routes when the German spring offensive threatened to break Allied lines in France. Royal Navy led, featuring British, Canadian, and Australian personnel, with minor support from the French Navy, these were not raids for glory. They were a desperate defensive move to keep the Allies in the fight. In his lectures after the war, Bourke emphasized that everyone involved in the blockship raids had volunteered for the operations. He noted that when the call went out for 1,600 volunteers, they received 3,500 applicants, even though they were told it was a suicide mission with the possibility that not one person would survive. According to a newspaper account, the expedition comprised 70 vessels and had 588 casualties. Quote, "To pass this great array of shipping through our own minefields, to keep station during the crossing, and to take the whole through the German minefields by means which cannot be described, afterwards accurately timing the various phases of the attack, was a wonderful piece of seamanship." Unquote. The motor launches Roland served on were 80-foot wooden vessels designed for coastal defense and submarine chasing. Powered by petrol engines with a top speed of around 19 knots, they were typically armed with a single 3-pounder and several machine guns.
Motor Launch 276, Dover, 11th of October 1918. D. John. I have not heard from you for ages, and it is a long time since I wrote last, so I am sending you this long account of my last 6 months' happenings, as I know you will be interested to hear all about my luck. As you know, I spent a year in Larne. Although the work was useful as a preventative to submarine activity, yet we had only negative results, such as no ships being sunk in our area to show for our labors. After considerable delay on the part of Dover, I was allowed to exchange my command of Motor Launch 341 at Larne for that of Motor Launch 276 at Dover. I commenced work at the beginning of November 1917, and soon came to the conclusion that Dover was a good base. About December I heard that leave was being granted to Canadians, but found I had to await the return of officers from Dover, who had already left, before I could have mine. About February, my motor launch had to go under repairs, so I again spoke to Commander Ben about my leave, but he urged me to stay as he was very short of officers, and important operations were expected fairly soon. So I held my application. After 2 months under repair, I started to return to Dover from Rochester, but dropped both propellers on account of faulty work of contractors. I made a special trip to Dover and succeeded in arranging for new propellers to be fitted at once at Queenborough. On arriving at Dover, I heard volunteers had been called for special dangerous work, the nature of which was not specified. And of course, I volunteered at once. The experimental base started to fit me with smoke gear, and I did all I could to hurry them. 2 evenings at dusk, I had my smoke tested, but it did not work satisfactorily. The next morning I was ordered to be ready at noon to take Captain Collins, Commander Ben and others out on a maneuver. I was busy ashore collecting gear, and Sub-Lieutenant Lower took the motor launch out for smoke trial and returning to pier, fouled his propellers with rope. Another motor launch had to be detailed. I was, of course, awfully disappointed, but it could not be helped. And I made the best of it by arranging for a diver to clear my propellers at once. The following evening I had a successful smoke trial and reported to the motor launch office I was ready for sea. I also asked if I had been chosen for volunteer work and found that I had not. I was very cut up when I heard this, especially after postponing my Canadian leave and working hard to be ready on time. As I left the office, I ran into Commander Ben and inquired why I had not been selected. He told me it was on account of my sight, but said if he needed another motor launch he would bear me in mind.
Captain Sir Ion Hamilton Ben, 1st Baronet, was the commander of a flotilla of motor launches in the Dover Patrol for 3 years during the First World War and was obviously Roland's superior officer. His wartime service was recognized with the Distinguished Service Order, appointment as a companion of the Order of the Bath, the Croix de Guerre, and mentions in dispatches. Captain Ralph Collins was a career naval officer assigned to manage RNVR personnel. For his services during these raids, he was awarded the Companion of the Order of the Bath. Sub-Lieutenant Arthur Reginald Marsden Lower held the role of First Lieutenant for the motor launch, which was the second in command to the motor launch captain. Lower is well known for his academic career in Canada after the war and for writing the books, Colony to Nation, and My First 75 Years, an autobiography. A 2-month stay at Rochester implies a major mechanical overhaul or significant structural repair. The trip from Rochester to Dover required navigating the River Medway, passing Sheerness, and then turning south into the open sea. Queenborough, located on the Isle of Sheppey, near the mouth of the Thames, served as an auxiliary base and maintenance hub for small craft. There were 2 types of smoke screens, chemical and oil. Chlorosulfonic acid was stored in tanks on decks of motor launches. The chemical was sprayed through nozzles into the ship's engines or directly into the air. When the acid hit the moist sea air, sulfuric acid droplets and hydrochloric gas formed a dense mist. On larger destroyers, engineers restricted air intake to the ship's boilers while injecting excess fuel oil into the furnace, belching thick oily black clouds from the funnels. The British could layer these screens, white chemical smoke to hide ships at water level, and black oil smoke blocked spotters in towers or aircraft.
The next day the motor launch fleet sailed for Dunkirk. On arrival, we learned that volunteers were for the rescuing of blockship crews. There were 2 motor launches selected for the rescue work, but it seemed to me that it would be a wise precaution to have another motor launch standby in case either of the rescue motor launches broke down or were put out of action. After seeing Commander Ben on numerous occasions, he agreed to this and appointed me standby motor launch. Well, at last a favorable night came, and we left harbor anchoring in divisions outside. I was just about to snatch a little supper while anchored when a motor launch came alongside with Commander Ben and his yeoman of signals, who came aboard. It transpired that Commander Ben had picked up a cable around his propellers while leaving harbor, and consequently was transferring his flag to my motor launch. The fleet proceeded to Ostend, and motor launches carried out their program, but blockships did not arrive. The fleet consisted of the following. First, monitors with motor launches to make smokescreen for them, which left Dunkirk at dusk and took up their stations about 10 miles from Ostend. Second, destroyers, motor launches and coastal motorboats, which proceeded to vicinity of Ostend. The first duty of coastal motorboats, which are small and extremely fast, was to make smoke east and west of Ostend to screen the approach of the rest of the fleet. The motor launches, on arrival, took up this work. Some smoking from exhausts while underway, and some putting over smoke floats and keeping them replenished as necessary. The destroyers were on convenient positions to back up the motor launches if Hun destroyers attacked us. At first, the night was calm with a slight onshore breeze, which placed a fine bank of smoke between the motor launches and the shore 1 or 2 miles distant. The Hun let off a great number of star shells over the motor launches, which lit them up like bright moonlight, and also shelled us at random. Some of their shells fell near, but there was not much chance of being hit. Just before the blockships arrived, the wind changed to offshore and blew the smoke out to sea, so that the Hun was able to pick up the blockships at 2.5 miles from the shore with his searchlights. Then pandemonium broke loose. They let fly with everything from 6-inch to 15-inch batteries and star shells galore. The whole sky was alight, and it was a truly wonderful sight to see these long grey warships, HMS Brilliant and HMS Sirius, being hit over and over again, but never stopping or swerving from their course.
Dunkirk, on the coast of France, was a strategic base for the Dover Patrol, and was used to launch operations on the continent. By 1918, Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare was close to starving Britain into submission. The inland Belgian city of Bruges served as a protected nest for German U-boats and destroyers. To reach the English Channel, these vessels traveled through 2 long canals that emptied into the sea at Zeebrugge and Ostend. The raid on the 23rd of April 1918 consisted of 2 operations to trap German U-boats and destroyers inside the canals using obsolete ships, stripped and packed with concrete and rubble to ensure they settled on the seafloor when sunk and could not be easily moved or blown up. One operation sailed 3 blockships into the Zeebrugge Canal with HMS Vindictive as the main assault vessel. Her role was to storm the most heavily defended seawall in Europe, called the Mole. The objective was to distract the German defenders and silence the heavy gun batteries on the end of the Mole, letting the 3 blockships, Thetis, Intrepid, and Iphigenia, slip past to the canal entrance. The other operation saw HMS Brilliant and HMS Sirius a few miles down the coast at Ostend. Bourke was on standby for the Ostend raid, but because of the heavy smoke and a buoy moved deliberately by the Germans, the Ostend blockships ran aground far from the canal they were supposed to block. Monitors, designed specifically for coastal bombardment, were used to produce smoke screens and keep the Germans' heads down with shelling. Because of the heavy smoke, monitors couldn't see their targets. They used aerial spotting via primitive radio communication from aircraft and pre-calculated blind fire to lob shells over the horizon and the smoke. While the blockships were making their suicidal runs, monitors ensured that any German destroyers attempting to leave would face their shells. Star shells were specialized artillery fired high into the air. A time fuse ignited a magnesium-based flare and deployed a small parachute. The magnesium burned with an intense brilliant white light, which, because of the slow descent, illuminated the sea for up to a minute. The ships were silhouetted against the white light, making them easy targets.
The rescue motor launches 283 with Lieutenant Commander Hoare, and 532 with Commander Ben and 276 with myself followed them in. It was a weird experience. Bunches of star shells above their shells falling all round. 6 big ones within 40 feet in less than a minute. The most terrifying things were the big ones rushing overhead like trains and ending with a terrific crash. Also, their chain shot, which skipped along the water in great leaps, sometimes passing right over us and sometimes seeming to alter course and follow us round. Well, as bad luck had it, the blockships, which were in a sinking condition, went aground. We first went alongside HMS Sirius but found motor launch 283 on the other side. So we went alongside HMS Brilliant. We got some of the crew and then maneuvered alongside for more. An officer came to the side and called for someone to take his coat. Lieutenant Young, who is a son of Judge Young of Atlin, with a fine flow of language, requested him not to be a goddamned fool and to jump. Next time we got alongside, Crutchley came aboard and shaking Young warmly by the hand said, "Mind you go back and get our captain. He is a jolly good sort." The captain was Commander Gordsul, and needless to say we got him. As the crew came aboard, I ordered them below, and it was fine the way the petty officers took it up, and the men went below. the only reluctant ones being those who wished to see their pals were safe aboard. This was of course under machine gun fire from the shore, as well as shell fire. On leaving HMS Brilliant, we had a look on her port side, but found no one there, and motor launch 283 leaving with the crew of HMS Sirius. We then started out, but received an SOS call from Commander Ben. On closing him, we found he had rammed a blockship in the dark and crumpled his bow back to the first bulkhead. His exhaust manifold had broken and gassed his 2 mechanics and another man. We stood by him for a short time and then took him in tow. We parted 3 lines on him, as his fair leads were gone, and he was shoving 6 feet of water ahead of him. My port acid tank, used for smoking, had been hit, and we had to keep our hose on it washing acid overboard for hours. This caused smoke, and great credit was therefore due to Sub-Lieutenant Young, who had to work in this smoke while passing out lines to Commander Ben's motor launch. It also made it difficult for me to maneuver astern sufficiently close to pass lines over. We went in with blockships at 12:30, and at 2 were still east of Ostend. All the small craft had, of course, left for Dunkirk before this. But about 3:30 a.m., we picked up a destroyer which stood by us for some time. We arrived at Dunkirk at 6:30 a.m. I was not sorry, as I had not left the bridge for 12 hours. The HMS Brilliant crew were very enthusiastic, and each man shook hands with me, and when they got ashore cheered us most lustily.
Lieutenant Commander Keith Robin Hoare was a banker and yachtsman before and after the war, and by April 1918, was already a legend in the Dover Patrol. Just weeks before, he won the Albert Medal for throwing live depth charges off a burning boat to save the harbor, and is one of the most decorated citizen sailors of the war. Commander Alfred Godsell had served on a variety of ships in the Mediterranean, West Indies, and China Station, and by 1914, was an elite officer. Godsell was promoted to commander at the age of 32, and volunteered for the blockship operations. Lieutenant Victor Alexander Charles Crutchley was a career Navy officer with ties to the British monarchy. By 1918, he was already a veteran. Crutchley eventually rose to admiral in the Second World War and was knighted for his service. Lieutenant Alexander Young was the son of Frederick McBain Young, who was the first judge in the County Court of Athlone in northern British Columbia. While tens of thousands struggled toward Dawson City in 1898, a massive gold strike was found at Pine Creek in Athlone, which became a prosperous frontier town. Roland's brother John was still in the goldfields when the letter was written, so John would likely have been familiar with Judge Young. Lieutenant Young returned to British Columbia after the war and took up law like his father. Chainshot referred to German flaming onions, rapid-fire anti-aircraft and anti-personnel rounds. They were large glowing green or white phosphorus balls discharged in strings of 5 to 10. Because they were launched in such rapid succession and had such bright tracers, they appeared to be physically linked by a chain of fire as they curved through the sky. Despite heavy fire, Roland's motor launch rescued 38 sailors from the sinking HMS Brilliant and towed a crippled motor launch out of the harbor. The letter to John goes on to describe the next blockship operation 3 weeks later, but that will be in another episode. Roland Bourke has been referred to as the bravest of all holders of the Victoria Cross for his extraordinary rescue missions during the blockship operations of 1918. For his gallantry, he was awarded the Victoria Cross, Distinguished Service Order, French Legion of Honor, and Croix de Guerre. Following the war, he and his new wife embarked on a lecture tour about his war experience, traveling through Australia and New Zealand, before returning to farm in Nelson, British Columbia. Roland moved to Esquimalt in 1932 to take up a job at the Canadian Forces Base. As another war loomed, he was instrumental in creating the Fishermen's Reserve, known as the Gumboot Navy, and was called to active service with the Royal Canadian Naval Volunteer Reserve in 1939. Though his eyesight prevented him from combat duties, he reached the rank of acting commander and held critical shore appointments. He retired in 1950 and was buried with full military honors when he died in 1958. Museums and archives offer a wealth of primary sources such as those featured in this audiogram. These materials provide a spotlight on historical events and social history not found elsewhere. Letters and diaries, particularly, offer personal insights into the past. The Canadian Passages project hopes to make unique materials held by CFB Esquimalt Museum more accessible to audiences around the world. This audiogram was produced by K.M. Lowe in collaboration with CFB Esquimalt Naval and Military Museum, which, unless otherwise noted, holds all rights to the original materials. This content, including but not limited to recordings, commentary, and images, is protected by Canadian and international copyright laws. All rights are reserved. No part of this production may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted without prior written permission from the copyright holder, but links to the official version may be shared. For more information on this project, please visit canadianpassages.ca. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe for more content like this.